Profiles on Nantucket Community Television and Channel 18. I'm Charley Walters. One of the events of the 2020 virtual Nantucket Film Festival was a world premiere of a film titled Julia Scotti, Funny That Way. This is a documentary about the comedian Julia Scotti, who for decades has been performing stand-up in venues of all sorts. But as you'll see, her professional successes are only part of her story. I'm pleased to have on the program not only Julia Scotti, but also Susan Sandler, the producer and director of the aforementioned film. Welcome to both of you.
Hi.
Thank you, Charlie.
Julia, I'm going to begin with you.
Sure.
Why is Susan's film so much more than simply a film about a stand-up comedian?
Well, comedians in general are pretty complex people, but I had a life prior to being Julia Scotti, and that was as Rick Scotti. And I had a 20-year career as a comedian as Rick Scotti. And so I took a 10-year sabbatical. When I came back as Julia, that's when all of this stuff started to happen. So Susan's film, sort of takes people through the walk as to what I went through over the last 10, 20 years and how difficult it was to get there. And so that's, I think that's why it's important. It's an important film because there were a lot of people going through the same issue, but not as comedians, but just in life in general.
I'm going to come back to that, but I want to bump over to Susan right now. How did this film come to be?
This film was born on Nantucket.
Mm-hmm.
I had the extreme pleasure of seeing Julia perform at the Dreamland on a bill that was organized by Nantucket treasurer Jane Condon, who's a great comedian and beloved by so many people here. And Jane does quite an amazing thing every summer. She brings, she curates incredible talent, comedians, brings them to Nantucket, hosts them completely, as Julia will attest to, and in every way. And I always go out with her crew. I just love meeting everybody who Jane brings. And I've worked with Jane on a one-woman show, and it's just kind of part of my summer is to hang out with Jane and the folks that she brings. This particular night, I was blown away. I was blown away by Julia Scotti. And we hung out afterwards and started talking about everything creative. And I offered to read a pilot that Julia had co-written with one of her comedian colleagues. And out of that, we began talking creatively about a one-woman show and collaborating together and everything that we could do that would be fun creatively. And the more I spoke with Julia, and this was over a period of months, the more I saw the scope of her story, which really wanted to be a documentary. And it was kind of an exciting moment for me because my background is in narrative film. I'm a screenwriter and a playwright. But stories are stories, and rich, complex characters are where stories begin. And that is who Julia is. And, it began with falling in love with her comedy and then really being compelled to tell her story after I came to know more and more about it. And the ultimate real piece was winning her trust. It's a big deal for someone to say, let me tell a story about your life. And to open that door, to give someone access to your story and all of the materials of your life is a huge act of trust. And I feel enormous gratitude to Julia for showing me that.
Julia, at one point in the movie you say, and I think I've got this down as an exact quote, you say, "I bless and curse the day I found out who I was." Expand on that a little bit.
Well, I think, as human beings, we spend a good portion of our life trying to figure out the meaning of our lives. And I had this emptiness inside me for most of my adult life. And when I found out what my issue was, the blessing part of it was I felt complete and I felt at peace for the first time in my life. And the cursed part of it was the consequences of coming out. And me being very naive, when I decided I was going to come out, I said, oh, everybody will be pretty happy because they've always said all my life how unhappy I seem. And so, now that I know what it is, I want to share this with people. Well, when I started to come out, it wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. And so that is the cursed part of it.
Well, now, at the time you did come out, you were married to a woman and you had
Yes,
2 children.
not by her, but yes, from her previous
Yes.
marriage. Yes.
That's right. Talk about that, because it seems that made a difficult situation all the more difficult.
Um, she was the love of my life. She was also a therapist, and she helped me figure out what was wrong with. I hate to use the word wrong. She helped me figure out what the issue was, and she saw me through the transition. She helped me get a doctor. She came with me to Montreal for gender reassignment surgery. She was there every step of the way, and all this time thinking that we were going to spend the rest of our lives happily together as a lesbian couple. And this experience changes you. It changed me, not just physically, but mentally. It changed her in how she dealt with me. And so after it was over, we began to drift apart until finally, I think she more than me decided that we weren't going to survive this as a couple. I still love her, and I think she still loves me, but we are no longer in contact with one another.
Now, this happened around the time that you started a 20-year hiatus. When you started that hiatus, did you know it was going to be 20 years?
Actually, it was a 10-year hiatus.
10 years.
Yeah, I had done 20 years as a stand-up comic as Rick.
Okay.
And then I never intended to come back to comedy. I went back to college. I became a teacher. I taught for about 7 years. I realized that comics don't do well with authority figures. And while I loved teaching, I hated the administration, and I left. Became a stockbroker, actually, which was my avocation. And just about the time I got licensed, the crash of 2008 happened. And it was a struggle. It was an uphill battle with that, too. So I eventually sold that business. And just on a whim, a friend of mine suggested that I come back to do a set at a comedy club. And you never lose your love of comedy. And so I took her up on that. And I went up. I admitted that I was trans and got some laughs from it. And from that point on, I never left.
Susan, I've got 2 questions for you. They're somewhat related. Tell us more about your background. You are too modest.
My background, that's a big question, Charlie.
Well, you spoke of doing teleplays, et cetera, but please give us details.
My background is primarily as a screenwriter and playwright. And my sort of headline credit is the film and the play Crossing Delancey, which was a highly autobiographical story about my relationship with my grandmother and the fantasy I had of a perfect man who turned out to be a pickle man. And it was a play that I wrote that was actually performed on Nantucket in its early days. And I adapted as a screenplay that starred Amy Irving and Peter Riegert and some other wonderful folks, and just had its 30th anniversary as a film. And I teach at NYU in the film school, where I guide the Fusion Film Festival, which celebrates women behind the camera.
And you're still writing plays that are performed in New York, although not during the pandemic, of course.
Yes.
And you've written teleplays.
Yes.
So that leads me to my second question. Given all that you do, how did you find the time to do this movie?
When you are hooked on something, when there's a passion, you clear the decks and make it happen. So it's been a 5-year journey of living with Julia Scotti. And if I didn't adore her, and if I didn't feel compelled to tell her story, and if it wasn't as rich and complex and joyful a story as it is, it would have been very hard to stay with it. It was just the opposite. The energy for the project, the energy for staying with it, the energy for following Julia's story comes out of my conviction that her story is really important. And I love the craft of storytelling. And I was very excited by the idea of looking at the materials of documentary, which are very different from the materials of narrative writing, where you imagine a story and you can bring anybody into the room you want to bring into the room, create characters that you want to create conflicts that you want to create, everything that serves the trajectory of the story. With documentary, it's the, you know, it's the wonderful, big, messy stuff of life, which is unpredictable and complex and doesn't always go where you want it to go, of course. So figuring out those pieces and figuring out how to tell a story that was true to Julia's journey and at the same time richly entertaining, that's been the real thrill of this. And I love doing it. I love the whole experience of learning every day and figuring things out. And it's very, very much supported by artists in my life, specifically people I met through my work at NYU. I found a wonderful animator named Sam Roth, who came out of the program where I teach and who does beautiful work in the film. I met a composer, this will be interesting to you. I met a composer, Charlie, named Matt Hutchinson. He's not the Matt Hutchinson we know on Nantucket as the jazz pianist. I had gone online to, when I was searching for my composer, I thought, well, let me see what, you know, what Matt Hutchinson has online. And I was looking for Matt Hutchinson, who we know on Nantucket as a great jazz pianist. And I found Matt Hutchinson a really brilliant composer for film and television. And I listened to a sample of music of his that I just loved, called him, and you know, that happened. And it was just one of those crazy accidents of fate that I got connected to someone through, again, a Nantucket connection. So it's, you know, it's been that kind of a journey of the people who I've brought into the project and the way the story has come together creatively has been a really beautiful collaboration across a lot of different art forms.
Susan Sandler, I've met very few people in my life as dynamic as, if Susan wanted to start a cult, she would have billions of followers because she is so single-minded, so dynamic, and such an inspiration in her work ethic as to make me feel ashamed of my own work ethic. She's a remarkable human being, brilliant, and I'm so blessed to have her in my life. And couldn't think of a better person to have handed this project to. There was never an issue, never any doubt in my mind that she would not produce the things she produced, the wonderful things she produced. So that's all. And that's all I'm going to say about you, Susan.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, as they say, if you want something done, get a busy person to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's counterintuitive, but I think it's absolutely true. Susan, one thing you do in the film is to use a lot of older footage of Rick Scotti. And I'm wondering how Julia feels when she looks at that old footage of herself starting out in a career and not yet being Julia.
I never like looking at myself on anything, either as Rick or as Julia. It's just it's just the way we are as comics. We have no self-esteem whatsoever. I think the quality material I do now is much better. I look at that stuff back then and I see somebody who was developing as a comedian and who was terribly unhappy and looking for himself or herself as a human being. So I don't even like looking at my material now. So it's just, I'm very critical.
Let's dig a little deeper on that. How is comedy in general, not just your comedy, but how has comedy in general changed since you first got into the business?
Well, comedy always, comedians always tend to reflect what's happening in the world at the moment. We also tend, especially newer comedians, tend to emulate their heroes. My heroes were people like Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Lenny Bruce, and a dozens of others. And when I started, I wrote in that style. And it takes about 10 years of doing it for a living constantly to find your own style. I've put in the time, I put in the effort, I've done the writing. I am now at a point where, because I am my authentic self now, my comedy reflects that. And I had two criteria when I came back. and those were to be brutally frank and totally fearless. And I think that's where I'm still working to that, but I'm getting closer.
Talk about the time you were on America's Got Talent.
Yes, they actually found me. They found my website, and thank God for Kathy Caldwell, who was my manager at the time. And they asked if I wanted to audition, and I wasn't sure. I don't watch shows like that, and I have this thing about competition that I'm not real wild about. So I said to her, I said, "Svetlana, you think we should do this?" She goes, "Are you insane? They're offering you an audition that you don't have to wait online for." So I went, I did it. A couple of months later, we heard that we got the program. They gave me a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do there. As you know, excuse me, I dropped the F-bomb on the show. They left that up to me. I wasn't going to do it. The producer suggested that I do, and that the audience would love it, and they did. The coming out part, that was my decision. They did not force me to do it, and it wasn't until Howie actually asked me why I was gone for 10 years, and I still wasn't sure if I was going to say it. But then I thought, well, this could help a lot of people if I come out. 13 million people watch the show, and so I did. Audience went crazy, and that's the story.
The hosts and hostesses on that show, Julia, I'm wondering if they knew what you might be about to say, or was it as much of a surprise?
That's a good question. If you go by their reactions, the answer is no.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, I don't know that they knew. I never asked. I didn't want to know. For sure, the audience didn't know. Most of in America didn't know. So I'm going to go with no, they didn't know.
Susan, as a playwright, you're dealing with actors all the time. And Julia, as a stand-up comic, part of being a stand-up comic is an ability to present your material. If you have great material, but you don't know how to present it, you aren't going to get very far. So my question is for Susan. I'm wondering what it was like to deal with someone who is not really an actor, but is an actor.
Well, Charlie, documentary is not about directing a performance. Documentary is about listening and about being invisible in the presence of someone's life and an event. So I never directed Julia. There was never a moment of eliciting anything or asking for anything except winning her trust and trying to be as discreet as possible, in her presence. What was remarkable with the story and with Julia and what she allows us to see, what she permitted me to shoot, was the private. The idea of what a performer does in performance, the public, that is very polished and very conscious, and what happens in private, which is completely unguarded and vulnerable. And what, is the gift for me and from the audience to this film is that Julia, a very public person with a beautiful persona in performance, drops all of that, drops that mask and lets us into her private life. And that's not something that I directed. That's something that I had the privilege of shooting, which was, a 5-year journey of being in her presence. And then the work for me as a storyteller is to find the story in this very dense record of a life over a 5-year period. So it's, it's a different process, Charlie, than working with a character, a big personality in a play, an actress who has, great performance chops and who you're trying to shape. That was never the story with Julia. I never asked for anything. I just was able to be in her presence and to observe.
I guess what I'm wondering is if you had observed someone who was not in the performing arts, would you be less likely in being interested in doing a documentary about that person?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer. It depends upon the individual, their journey, their choices, their crisis, where the drama is, you know, where the bridges are. That's that's hard to know. I don't think it has to do with a character who has a performance style and then opens another door. I think someone who has a very, very simply different life could also be interesting. It depends upon the specific circumstances of their lives, and what they're facing and what they're juggling.
So as a director in this particular case, and since you weren't directing the way you would for a stage presentation, a narrative presentation, what does director do in this instance?
The work of finding the source material for a documentary, coming to know your subject, getting a sense of where the story wants to travel, begins with getting complete access, as much access as you can, to every conceivable source material that can feed the story. So in this case, because Julia has a rich archival history, there was so much material that was available to me that she made available to me. That meant going to the back of her closet and digging out every piece of archival footage I could find. That meant demo tapes, performance footage, anything that offered images that would be useful, books, journals, letters, creative writing. And then ultimately, I started to make the outline for the story, the story map, which is where I saw in this mass of material the story was going to be. And I did what's called a paper edit, which is the beginning of the shape of the movie. I found in Julia's journal a section of material that I thought would make a beautiful opening, that I asked her to read. And then I worked with my animator to animate those pieces. And then I figured out what archival would fit into there. So, it's a mosaic of the story that is built from all of these elements, very complex collection of elements, and trying to find the spine and the thread that builds both the energy and the suspense and the sense of why you want to stay following the story. Just as you would in any book that you pick up or movie that you watch, there has to be an energy that says to the viewer, stay with me, there's something else to learn, there's something else coming. And because this is documentary, it can't be forced, it has to be observed, it can't be manufactured, it has to be honest. So that honesty coupled with craft is what becomes hopefully a film that people want to watch.
Julia, a few moments ago, you talked about writing material. I'm wondering how much of your material you do write.
All of it.
All of it.
Oh, sure. The days of comedians hiring writers is gone. And I shouldn't say gone. If I were on a recurring series or doing a late night set or something like that, I might consult with some writers to help me polish the set. But my act as it stands right now is 100% me. It's always been. I've never used other people.
Now, do you have a regular time of the day, a regular schedule when you sit down to write, or does it just come to you when it comes to you?
A little bit of both. I will try to do at least an hour every day. But again, I don't know how much you know about comedians, but we're wonderful procrastinators. I can find 1,000 things to do before I'll sit down and look at my computer and start to write. But I try. I keep a notebook with me. If something strikes me as funny, I'll just jot it down and then go back and work it later.
You've appeared all over the United States, and you've also appeared in Canada. And most people, not everybody, but most Canadians do speak English. Mm-hmm. So there's never a question of, or rarely a question of understanding what it is you're saying. But I'm wondering, is the Canadian sense of humor different from the American, and in what way?
The speech patterns are what's different when you go to a different country, or even really different parts of the country. The ear gets accustomed to hearing people speak a certain way, and so when I go there, I know I have a Jersey accent. I know I tend to slur my words a little bit. I know I can speak way too fast. And so it takes me maybe a day to adjust. And so that's really the only difference. In terms of senses of humor, it's universal stuff that I talk about. So no, there's no difference.
Really, I find that fascinating. Um,
Well, funny is
because-
funny. I mean, it's, that's why, Chaplin was universally loved, because he never said a word, but the things he did, everyone around the world could relate to. I mean, I could go to England and do my show, and it may take me a while to adjust to the speech pattern there, but I'll get them. I mean, I'll get them by a couple of shows in, sure.
when you appear on stage, you obviously have a game plan of one sort or another. Depending on how the audience is reacting to you, do you change that game plan mid-performance?
Not mid-performance. I mean, I'll get to the show early. I'll watch the crowd come in. I'll read them, and most comics do. We were able to sit in the back of the room and read the audience and know what kind of an audience it is. I'll get out there. Excuse me. I have some test questions, or sometimes test statements, to see how the audience reacts. And if it's a great reaction, then I'm good to go. If not, I have to stop, work a little bit to get them listening, to get them to pay attention. And this is usually, you see this a lot when you're working a weekend in a club, between the Friday night show and the Saturday night show. And the Friday night show, they're tired, they've been working all week, they really don't want to work at laughing, they want to kind of spoon fed to them. So you really have to sort of get in there and pump them up when you first hit the stage. Saturday, it's going, in most cases, it's a given. I mean, they're all primed, they're ready to laugh. So it depends. Yes, each crowd is different.
Susan, I asked you about directing, and I'm wondering if you could say a few words about producing.
Sure. In this case, in an indie documentary, the process is very demanding because it's about building all the resources. And that means everything from recruiting people to work on the project and building all of the funding for the project. So the idea of who comes onto the project and how you compensate them and who supports the project and how your resources are built, all of that along with the creative work, and then figuring out what the production schedule is going to look like and ultimately how the film is going to reach its audience. So, it's a whole other journey. It's a whole other set of skills. And in documentary, a lot of documentarians have producers that they've worked with in the past and who they continue to work with. I climbed into this project thinking that I would recruit someone who might come on board to produce with me. And I didn't have the funding to hire a producer, so I put on that hat, and that's what I've been doing. So it's been a huge, huge project to undertake in terms of carrying both of those loads, but I've learned everything along the way in terms of what it takes for both of those jobs. And it continues to be really interesting, in terms of what's happening now with figuring out where we're headed with the film after our festival run. We're currently at 2 festivals, playing this week the Bentonville Film Festival, which was developed by Gina Davis and supported by Coke and Walmart. And that's a festival that celebrates diversity and inclusion, which is so cool. 80% of the films featured in the festival are directed by women. And that's pretty rare to hear that. We're also at AGLIF, which is a festival in Austin. That is a festival that is, the acronym is All Genders, Lifestyles, help me, Julia. All AGLIF.
I knew you were going to ask me that. All genders, lifestyle, blah 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 blah, and us.
Yeah, and you did a good commercial for them. So we're having a great time bringing the film to audiences and doing it in this moment, this COVID moment where we can't sit in the room with people, which we were speaking with Frank earlier about. It's just, it's really hard. We had imagined that we would be bringing the film to festivals with the delicious dessert of being able to say, and here's Julia Scotti doing stand-up at the club around the corner from where we're screening the film. That was the plan, that we were going to travel that road, and Julia would be doing, sets wherever the film opened. And now, we're having to, do what everyone else is doing, which is figure it out via Zoom.
Yeah, and I'm brushing my cat instead of going around the country being adored. I'm brushing my cat. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the moment we're in. We're doing the best we can to figure it out. But what's happening is we're getting fabulous reviews. It's so exciting, Julia, isn't it? Just to wake up every day and say, "Whoa, they said that."
I said to you the other day, we were talking about this. I said, it never seemed like a real movie to me because I'm in it. And then I start seeing these reviews and I'm going, oh, it really is a movie. And they've been wonderful to us. They really, really have.
And I want to say, Charlie, to your audience, that I'd love for people to know about our website. The website is juliascottistory.com. And at juliascottistory.com, you can learn everything about the film, and all of the social media links are there to our Facebook page, to our Twitter account, and to our Instagram. And that is full of information about where the film is screening, and there are clips from the film. All of that is accessible there. And as we approach release, all of that information will be available at that site, juliascottistory.com.
Good, thank you for mentioning that. Julia, one more for you before we start to wind down.
Sure.
If one wants to be an actor, one goes to acting school. If one wants to be a musician, music school, et cetera, et cetera. You can't just sign up for a comedian school, can you?
Well, there are classes. Most of the major cities have classes that you can take a stand-up course, and they usually culminate with you doing a 5-minute set at a bringer show, where your family and friends show up. But then the real work starts. I didn't have that when I started. I signed up for an amateur night at a Chinese restaurant and dressed up as Moses. and went up.
That footage.
There is no footage, mercifully, but you go up there and you just keep bombing until you don't bomb anymore. There's no easy way to say it. This is not, there are no exercises to get better other than to do it. And you need to do it by having the audience tell you how horrible you are until they tell you how wonderful you are.
Great.
Who knows how long that might take, right?
Oh, it took me close to 10 years before I started to see, with consistency, that I was doing okay up there.
Susan, what is next for you? What are you working on now?
Before I go to that, I just want to say, Charlie, how much I admire you and what you do and your whole history here on Nantucket. I was telling Julia about, your shop, the music hall, and it was this mysterious place to me. I would go down those stairs and there would be the most incredible collection of music, jazz and blues, and you were this mysterious creature who in Nantucket time, in the beautiful bright sunshine of Nantucket, you were always in this very mysterious, wonderful cave that was full of musical treasures. And I love the shop. I love the mystery of you and all the cool stuff that you did, and the people that seem to collect in your store. That you've created this presence in Nantucket media where you're having conversations with people about entertainment and really important environmental issues, and the curiosity and your elegance as an interviewer and as a journalist. I just admire you so much, and I don't know that people say that to you enough. I think everything that you bring to Nantucket and everything that you and Nancy are as a power couple, I just think, very cool. Very, very cool.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I'm almost speechless, but thank you. And what you're doing next is?
What I'm doing next is, after this film, which, I'm full-time working on the release and the producing of it in that form, I'm working on notes for what I think may be I'm not sure yet if it's going to be a mini series, but it feels like it doesn't want to be a feature. It feels like it wants to be, it's a narrative story in parts. It's based on a true character. But, and I read some of it to you, Julia, when you were here. You know, we talked about it. I don't want to talk about the content of it, but based on a character who I observed. And again, it's not a documentary. It's a narrative piece. So I can take it anywhere I want. That's the next place. I don't have a documentary in my pocket yet. I'm thinking about it, but that project isn't on the table yet.
I notice you used the word "yet," so we
Oh,
hope
don't count her out. She
keep asking you
there's
about that.
oh, there's a whole crew working up in her head about what's going to come next.
Julia, your turn. What's next for you?
Well, we're following up on the movie. I'd like to move into acting. I did some acting earlier this year, and I'd really like to find that casting directors will not only cast me as a woman with transgender experience, but as a cis woman too, a woman-born woman, because I feel like I could play those character parts. You know, if you look and you see like a Margot Martindale type part, I'm that character. If you're looking for a funny older woman character actress, think about me, or anybody that looks like me. Oh, and can I mention my album? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
I have it right here. It's called Julia Scotti, Hello Boys, I'm Back. It's available wherever you can download music. If you go to Pandora and download it, I think it's free. So
Free.
yeah.
Everyone's favorite word. Now, is that also on a CD or a DVD?
It is on a CD. Yeah, you can get it from Amazon, I think.
Well, having twice seen Julia Scotti funny that way, I can tell you that it's indeed funny, it's intelligent, and it's also quite moving. And I recommend anyone to seek it out. It is worth seeking out. Julia Scotti, Susan Sandler, thank you for taking the time to appear on this program.
Thank you, Charlie.
And for Profiles on Nantucket Community Television and Channel 18, I'm Charley Walters. Thank you for joining us.